Yes, Spurs fans, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur. We're back with another panel show this week for you guys to keep you company over the international break. And we still have some good questions to discuss. And now with our Irish contingent, last time it was a front three, but now it's even more Irish than the last time out. And these guys did an excellent job while I had some internet trouble. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. But we know that Dave would be willing to step in, of course. We have a few things to talk about. Good to see some people in the house tonight. Good to see the likes of Scotty Heinem, Artist T, and David Hall in here nice and early. Smash the like button as you're coming in here. If you do want to support the channel, welcome to become a member. And if you want to stop us at any point, feel free to do it with a comment, a question, or a super chat. But Colin, good to have you back with us. How are you?
Yeah, all good. Great to be back, boys. Another week has passed. Great to have a peaceful week in the international where you're just not sitting there worrying about a result or worrying about an upcoming match. So all good. Hope all you guys are good. And hello to everybody tuning in.
And Jack, do you enjoy the international breaks? This is your last one for a little bit.
Yeah, it depends how Tottenham are doing. If we're on a good run of form now, I can't stand it. But yeah, to be honest, the main concern is just that our players aren't getting injured, and that I'm not ashamed to be Irish. I guess that's the that's probably the main things about the international break. But unlike Tottenham, I think expectations are extremely low with Ireland. So I think sometimes that it doesn't affect your mood quite as much when you're just expecting to fail.
Yeah, it seems like you guys kind of sort of trade between two teams that are hard to get your head around, really, and sometimes hard to get motivated for, between Spurs and the Irish national team. But since we only speak to you guys once a week, really, I figured we'd ask you a little bit about your thoughts on the United game. Spurs created very little in the first half against Man United. For you, Colin, was that down to the tactics from Thomas Frank just not being implemented? Was it down to the team selection, which was a big talking point? What do you think it was, maybe, for why Spurs, in my opinion, were pretty poor in that first half?
Oh yeah, the first half was very little to write home about. It really did feel like we were playing with the handbrake on. Team selection was a bit mystifying. That left-hand side left a lot to be desired. And overall, two fairly bang average teams cancelling each other out. It wasn't... and I always measure it by the barometer of how often I pick up my phone, and I picked up my phone quite a bit. So I sat on the couch, feet up, and you have the phone turned face side down, which I love in the WhatsApp group. Somebody always will put in phones down now, boys. But you tell you what, 20 minutes into that game, I was certainly picking it up and having a route around X because I just was a little bit bored. It left a lot to be desired. But second half obviously was far more exciting.
Yeah, it's bad when you're answering emails, during a game, in the first half. But it sounds like, spending time on X sometimes is good to keep yourself company with. Jack, I mean, what did you put it down to? Because I think Spurs, they did come alive more in the second half, but the first half was sort of what we've seen a few times this season, just really lackluster going forward. So was it just down to his team selection or down to the tactics?
Well, I think if you're talking about Richarlison and Brendan Johnson being your wingers, you're probably not getting much out of them. And I think considering most of our ball progressions down the wide areas, I think when you have those two, you're probably going to struggle. I wasn't sure if Richarlison half the time was up front or on the wing. And I think sometimes he probably didn't know himself, which he was supposed to be playing. I saw Frank afterwards saying that they thought the game plan possibly worked, that Richarlison, I think he had one header in the first half, which it barely touched his head, and he was like, oh, well, that would have been the game plan working. But I think we looked really poor for the other, basically every other passage of play during that half. And I think you saw it come second half when he made the changes. That left-hand side, it just has to be a doggy and not a bear. Every game they're fit. I think we just look a different thing with the two of them out there. I think Xavi looks more comfortable with them there. I thought he actually did okay in the first half, but there was one clip particularly I remember seeing where Xavi got the ball, took past the player, took 3 or 4 touches, looked for a pass, and it was Kolo Muani and 4 Man United defenders.
Yeah,
Johnson wasn't even in the shot. I don't know where Richarlison was. And you're kind of like, well, what chance does he have if that's the front line he's working with, where 3 of the 4 players aren't even in shot of 20 yards of him? So I think it's fairly hard to get anything going like that. I don't know if that's down to Frank's tactics or the players he's selecting, but it certainly doesn't look great when those guys are out on the pitch together.
Just to follow up on that, Jack, like I did also, we discussed that on the fan show yesterday, and I think there is a bit of a split between Is that just the players being told just sort of to play it safe, not take too many risks by going forward? Is that just down to them?
I think it's probably a mix. I think he's probably selecting those players because maybe that's what they give you, is that extra security. I know a lot of people were happy to see Richarlison come on the wing. Oh, he'll put a shift in, but I think current Richarlison, I don't think he really is putting a shift in. I think physically he's kind of struggling. I think if you had him for maybe starting one game a week, coming on the other, keep him fresh, he'd probably be semi-useful. But I think when he's playing 2 games a week or even 3 in the space of 2 weeks, I think he looks like he's really struggling physically, which I think is as a result of kind of injuries he's carrying. But I think Frank is a lot of it. I think the double pivot of Paulinho and Bentancur is I think that's a perfect epitome of Frank playing it safe versus, and that's the tactics, and he's happy with those guys rather than the guys themselves being particularly a big issue. I think for big games, certain players are suited to that, but for those home games, Man United aren't a very good team. I think we should be a bit more ambitious in how we play, and I think you saw that in the second half.
Yeah, the second half was, I don't know whether you want to move on to the second half yet, Jack, but
sure.
Second half,
totally different later, please.
Yeah, totally different game. Without wanting to use too many cliches, the handbrake certainly felt like it came off. Left-hand side was solved. In terms of getting players into the box, felt a lot better. It was a repeated problem, as you've observed in the first half, that there just was no support. Even if the ball was swung in with some quality, there was no one there to get on the end of it. Or even if there was somebody to get on the end of it, Richarlison missed it. So, it was certainly a much, much better second half. But I have to say, as a Spurs fan, that was the epitome of being a Spurs fan, down to a T. Snatching a draw from the jaws of victory. It was just so wonderful to sit there and then just have your bubble burst all over the place. I did feel very, very passionately for Richarlison. I knew the minute the shirt came off that there was going to be trouble, but it was great to see him and the passion he brings. And that's why I love a player like that. It just pours through the telly at you. I can't imagine what it was like in the ground. The man was up for an Oscar. But then to have it all snatched away from you with that big lump at the back post, and you're just thinking, it's just so Spurs, isn't it? It just is. So my whole life I'm watching this, you're thinking it's 11 guys, there's 10 Manchester, just put everybody on the line and clear that ball. We're in the dying seconds, and we, for some reason, just can't manage it. But a very entertaining second half, and a very, I won't say pleasing, but more promising display from Spurs in the second half. But certainly it gave me a little bit of cheer.
Dave brought up this stat, Colin, about how Spurs have committed some of the most errors that have led to goals. And you would say that Man United game sort of felt like a reflection of that. Pop Matasar, right? Terrible decision to give it to Van de Ven. And then also on the second goal, Johnson losing his man in De Ligt. And some people are blaming Vicario as well for the second goal. But that's also maybe was a bit frustrating, right? The 2 goals we conceded kind of down to mistakes, really, not really quality from Man United.
Yeah, we are absolutely, Man United, I don't think are a good team, but I don't think we're a particularly good team either. But for sure, we are absolutely the architects of our own downfall in 80% of this season so far. It is an astonishing record of errors. But I do feel that comes from, and I'd say this comes from Frank, and I'd say it comes from above Frank. And I really feel that the way he's playing at the moment, particularly at home, with that, kind of like everyone's a bit afraid, is because he's probably under an awful lot of pressure to perform in the league after the 17th place finish last year, which is probably high on the agenda of the hierarchy at Spurs. And he's probably under a lot of pressure to deliver. And I think that's been translated to the players. You've then got the tension that's in the crowd. That's probably being translated to the players, and that's what leads to mistakes like this. And then I think once he had acclimatized and Frank was comfortable with what United could do, that's when he made the changes and tried to, and we were so close to winning it. And just think about the mood that we'd all be in. As I always say every week, context is everything. We've come away with a bit of a deflating draw, but we weren't beaten. That's we did get a reasonably credible draw. We were just so close to victory, and we've helped ourselves do that and had a victory snatched away. But I think once he'd understood what United could bring and what they could offer and how dangerous they were or weren't, he was happier to stick on a few more attacking players, or you'd argue perhaps he got it wrong from the start. But I think the home form is a hangover from last year, and the home form is because of the pressure he's under to bring, as what did they say in the press release, more victories or more wins more often. So, I feel he's under pressure. I do feel he's under pressure at home.
Do you not think the way he sets the team up so pragmatically at home invites more pressure on it, though?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. He's going to have to learn to cope with that. He's going to have to learn to try, or to be. He talks about being brave. I don't think he's being brave enough at home. Obviously, there's a difference in terms of the way the opposition will approach you in terms of home and away. When you're playing away from home, those home teams will come at you. And I do think that suits Spurs, because we are a very kind of Ange Postecoglou counter-attacking style team. And we're transforming into the Frank pragmatic style. But he certainly needs to take a leaf out of his own book. And I think with team selection and team setup and tactics, he needs to be braver at home, for sure.
Dave, I mean, I'd probably take Jason Bell's question here, which is interesting. Is Frank being conservative because he knows we're very limited in the attack and still have plenty of defensive mistakes in us? Can you explain maybe why he's being so conservative? Is there logic behind it, or is he just maybe at a loss?
Yeah, look, I can understand them coming in and making us hard to beat. I think first and foremost, from where we sort of finished off the league campaign last year, that's the first thing he has to do, is make us hard to beat. But I think many people always sort of looked at that back line under Postecoglou and said, with a bit of structure around it, we've got very good options there, and it will become a very good, back line. I think there's a part of that, but I also think there's a part of it of Frank just sticking to what he knows. What served him well at Brentford. I don't see any evolution of it, and I think that's where he's letting himself down a little bit. We can say, he's limited in attack. We brought in 3 players to alleviate that problem. Now, granted, one of them has been injured and that, but we're not really getting a lot of most of that front line. And that's where I sort of look at it and say to Frank, I think he has to adjust his tactics a little bit more to make the football more palatable on the eye for Spurs fans. At the end of the day, we have good enough players to play to make some good passing sequences and create more chances than what we're currently creating. And I think ultimately right now what you're seeing is more and more Spurs fans, like even guys that are, 100% behind Frank's, questioning the style of football. And we've been here before. We've had Nuno, we've had Jose, we've had Conte. When you're not picking up results, fans lose a lot of belief and a lot of buy-in. And I really do believe that Thomas Frank needs to, bring a bit more of a possession-based game and, make us a bit more potent going forward. Because I think one thing everyone overlooked when we signed Thomas Frank, and it's something I tried to highlight, his team's had some of the lowest possession stats, in the Premier League. And, I said that's something he's going to have to adapt at Tottenham. It's going to drain. It's going to become draining on the fans very, very quickly. And he has to take that handbrake off. Like, against Man United, I'm not being funny, but he doesn't need 45 minutes to see how good Man United are or how good they are. He brought in that coaching staff. They're well renowned for digging into the opposition and, identifying weaknesses and stuff. And I'm just not really seeing some of that being translated across onto the football pitch. But I do think there's an element that Frank has to start taking the handbrake off and letting us be a bit more free going forward. And I think if he does that, you shut up people like me and you go, okay, well, at least I can see what he's trying to do and stuff like that. But until that happens, I still have my question marks around it, but I definitely think, his first prerogative was setting us up, being hard to beat, which is first and foremost. But I also think a part of it is just also that's how he knows. He doesn't really know how to play this expansive sort of game or a better brand of football. And that's where I question.
Yeah. Just want to maybe throw this because this has been something that I've actually had trouble to really answer and, find the right sort of logic for, because I think it's a valid question that Dave has brought up, Jack, and I kind of want to ask it to you because I feel like you and I share a similar opinion about these two players. But Dave did say and brought up that Ange Postecoglou, despite maybe their weaknesses in Richarlison and Johnson, he did find a way for them to get to score goals and, get to scoring opportunities. And under Thomas Frank, it's been sort of the opposite, really. What do you make of that? That maybe one manager was able to get a tune out of them despite them being pretty rubbish at times and the other one hasn't.
Yeah, I think Johnson... Richarlison's a bit more of a tricky thing. I think Richarlison, is a lot down to his physical decline just from injuries just piling up on him. I think he's struggling physically. And I think Richarlison, particularly Ange's first season, we had 1 game a week. And Richarlison, when he was fit, looked pretty good. That's 1 game a week. Now he's expected to play 2 games a week. It's a lot harder for him. But Johnson, you're looking at the tactics under Ange. A typical Ange goal is one of the wingers, it gets to the byline, smashes across the box, and it makes it to the back post. And who's there? Brendan Johnson. But Thomas Frank's system isn't built around getting the ball from basically one post to the other. That's just not how he operates. His tactics are his main. If you think of the Thomas Frank goal, you think of a header from a set piece. So I think Ange's type of football, I think Johnson was just brought in to be on the end of those crosses. They obviously, when they were scouting him, they identified that Brendan Johnson's movement to that back post. I think it was, I saw someone very early days compare him kind of to Delhi. Did he just come in just at the right moment, just to tap the ball in? It looked like an easy goal, but when you're scoring 15 of those in the league in a season, it's not easy. But I think Johnson is such a limited player in what he does that I think maybe Ange probably was getting the best out of him, which you maybe couldn't have said about a lot of players. But I think Johnson probably was one of them. Maybe I think Richarlison's a bit more complex, but I think it goes back to the comparison as well, as Dave was saying about in possession stuff. I think in possession we weren't brilliant under Ange, but we looked like we knew what we were trying to do, especially his first season. You could see patterns of play. They consistently kind of have 4 or 5 patterns where, led by Romero, breaking lines with passes, going through the middle of the pitch, being brave in possession, and then it would be ultimately out of possession when the ball would get turned over or would be sitting in a deep block. That would be when we'd struggle, whereas Frank is the opposite. We're actually very good at defensive shape. If you look at the 2 goals to put us 1-0 down in both games, what did they come from? We had possession, didn't know what to do with it. Van de Ven ends up losing. I don't think that's Van de Ven's fault. I think that he probably should have smashed both of them and just gotten rid of them, but he was put in positions by teammates who didn't know where to go, because it looked like they probably spent 20-30% of their time practicing in possession, whereas under Ange, all Ange was about was what you do when you have the ball, and when you don't have the ball, it's about winning it back. So I think that's just different philosophies, and I think maybe Frank's struggling with the 2 games a week, the less time in the training ground. I think it's probably something he does have to work out, because ultimately, if you retain the ball better and don't make these mistakes trying to play out from the back, you're going to concede less goals. So I think it does benefit your defense, even if it's not out of possession work.
I think you're actually spot on about that last part about maybe the team is struggling with, and Frank is struggling with, that it's huge, maybe different sort of training instructions with Ange. It was all about what we do when we have the ball. And if, like you say, when we don't have the ball, look to win it back, which then made us look sometimes a bit defensively sort of sketchy.
It was kamikaze, whereas this is the complete opposite. It's like, please don't make a mistake. But ultimately, if you think don't make a mistake, what are you going to do? You're going to make a mistake, because if that's all you're thinking is not to try and not make a mistake. So you're forcing a mistake nearly by doing that. So I think just a bit more bravery. I think it's just small tweaks, and I think Ange did a great job. I think Ange's big thing was he was a motivator. I think Frank needs to get that through players' heads. Don't worry if you make a mistake. If you're being brave and make a mistake, that's not as big of a deal as if you're trying not to make a mistake and then make a mistake. So I think it's just a slight mentality shift, maybe, on top of a small tactical shift, and I think we'll look a lot better.
Okay. I agree with a lot of what you said there. And quickly to you, Colin, could Frank be getting more out of what is, in my opinion, a pretty lackluster forward line? But Ange was able to get a tune out of some of them.
Yeah, I do wonder the Richarlison one. I won't retread that ground. I agree with Jack. I do, a great trier, great effort, but I think he is overplayed and probably struggling a lot with, or he certainly looks like he's struggling physically. It's a tough one to call. I mean, Ange definitely did get a tune out of Brendan Johnson, but Brendan Johnson hasn't looked the same player, in my opinion. I appreciate it's an entirely different type of game we're now playing. So he was obviously, with all due respect to him, tapping in, so to speak, at the far post, but he had space to run into, and he is a clinical finisher. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But we're totally playing different football now. But I think he's just gone off form. It's as simple as that. I don't think he's showing any great form at the moment, and he's obviously not getting a start for Wales either, which would point to a bit of a lack of form for Johnson. So I think there's probably, if we progress the ball quicker, we could probably make better use of him, like we saw against Copenhagen when Xavi played that ball through to him, and obviously the result was a goal. So yes, I think Frank can do better, but I still am sympathetic to Frank that we are missing just so much firepower and creativity with Maddison out, with Kulusevski out, and with Solanke out in particular. Solanke is, he's good at holding up the ball, and he's a pretty neat finisher. So I'm sure Frank was probably licking his lips when he came into the team or into Spurs and was thinking, I get to work with a guy like that with the midfield that he's famous for having talked up before when he was the manager of Brentford. But those guys are just such a huge loss. I mean, I think we'd all be sympathetic to another team, unless it was Arsenal, if they were missing players of that ilk and that stature. So I think we will look a lot better. But yeah, I suppose to answer your question directly, he could do more, I think, to get more out of Johnson. But I'm not entirely sure if Johnson's not just simply not in good form.
Yeah, that's fair.
On that, I agree. Like, with Kulusevski coming back, Maddison coming back, you're hoping we look a bit more devastating when we do go forward. There's a lot of moves that do break down, with silly passes and stuff like that, granted. But there are certain things Frank has to do to take the handbrake off to allow these players, when they come back, to thrive. We have some of the lowest shots outside of the box in the Premier League. That's an instruction. We have some of the lowest true balls in the Premier League this season. That's an instruction. You go back to the amount of goals we've conceded by not knowing what to do in possession. Again, that's down to, a lack of training on the pitch. That's also down to over-rotation. You're not giving players a chance to build up these partnerships, rhythm and stuff like that. So I do think there are things that Frank also needs to do to be able to help improve the situation. Like, I don't want people to get into a false sense of security that all of a sudden these players are going to come back and all of a sudden it's going to solve our issues. Some of it is down to coaching and instructions, where Frank does need to take the handbrake off, allow them to shoot. For instance, that winner that we nearly scored against Man United, that came from Udebert taking a shot outside the box.
Yeah.
I mean, so there are things that Frank has to do. Copenhagen, Brennan Johnson's goal came from a ball over the top, a through ball. These are things where I do think that Frank has to take the handbrake off a little and allow some of these players to be a bit more free, in possession. And also, I think Jack brought it up, how far, like at one stage, Xavi Simons got the ball. All he had was Mawani, who was being tracked by like three Man United players, and no Johnson or Richarlison in the picture. That's because they're being asked to get so far back that, it's almost difficult at times. The ball travels quicker than any player. So, at the end of the day, it's so difficult at times for some of these guys to get up the pitch and support because, like I said, the ball travels quicker than any other player. So it's sort of like there are things that Frank needs to do to help it improve the situation. We can't just sit here and go, well, we're relying on Kulusevski, Maddison, and players like that. Because let's not forget, a lot of people questioned Maddison's commitment last year. A lot of people didn't rate Kulusevski for a large part. Now, all of a sudden, we're putting everything in their hands to come back and improve us. Some of it is down to Frank and the instructions that he needs to improve on to help these guys when they come back, though.
I also don't want to pop the balloon, but I mean, when Kulusevski comes back, how many months is it really going to take him to get back to full fitness? Maddison isn't going to be back until pretty much the end of the season. So what he has right now is pretty much what he gets. Solanke will be, of course, a big addition, but he's also been out for a considerable amount of time. How long will it take for him to get back to his full fitness? So what Frank has is kind of what he gets right now. These are the cards that he's going to have to make sense of, even though we have sympathy for it. This is sort of the set of players he has to work with.
I don't think any of those guys are... Sorry, Jack, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead, come.
No, I just don't think any of those players are going to come back and make a meaningful impact this season. That is my kind of read of it. I like, unless they come back and hit the ground running, Maddison takes weeks to get back up to speed, and Kulusevski, I feel, can be the same. The only one I'd have any faith in whatsoever is Solanke coming back and just can pretty much hit the ground running, because I just think he's class. I think he's very good. But just to agree with some of what you were saying there, Dave, I do think we probably are putting a lot in the let's get some creativity back in the team basket. But in terms of the United game in the second half, I do think there are. I know I'm eternally optimistic, but I do think there are some green shoots there. Both our goals were scored from more or less open play, and I thought Odobert was looking really bright. I thought Tell with that touch and turn and a shot. When was the last time we saw something like that? It is starting to look better, and Xavi, I think, has had his best. I know, obviously, he got subbed off, but he's had his best Premier League game, in my opinion. He was getting rid of the ball quicker and not getting knocked over as often. I just felt he'd had a really good. So I think it's
I agree.
It's uncomfortable to watch still, but it is improving. But the steps are really, really small, really small.
I agree. I think there are green shoots. It's just that came after we went 1-0 down. It's easy to take
it's disappointing
off when you're chasing a game. It's easy to express yourself when you're losing, but can you do that from the beginning of the game? And that's the question that Frank needs. I need Frank to answer.
And that's what I'm saying. He's not being brave. He's worried about results.
Maybe too worried.
Sorry, Dave.
Go ahead, Jack.
Sorry, Dave. Just on your point about the through balls, I know the statistic you're talking about. Where I remember seeing it, we're bottom with 4 through balls the entire season. In how many games we played? 10, is it? Like, you're talking about 1 every 2.5 matches, and I think Arsenal were top with 40, so 10 times as many. Like, that's. I looked at it and I was like, that cannot be a real statistic. Like, that's fairly damning, I think.
Yeah.
But I think if we're looking for positives, though, we went 1-0 down against Chelsea, and at least he changed it at halftime, and it did work. Whereas against Chelsea, it didn't work. Although it is against a worse team, but if we're looking for the green shoots again, at least it's something.
We're all going to be horticulturists by the end of this.
Hey, we're the herbology champions from the preseason. Iceman, member for 27 months. Thank you, sir, for all the support. Saying smash like, people. Fellas deserve it. Love this family. We stand together through thick and thin. Come on, you Spurs. Come on, you Harris Army. We need Jack's run again. Seriously, man. We need some sort of luck. We need some sort of type of run to get going. But also, it is kind of the life of a Spurs fan, the many roller coasters that we do ride together. And then I think as well, Iceman left a comment sort of saying that we are missing the creative players. And we were kind of just discussing that, Iceman. So appreciate you. And then I know Paul Connor's in here saying, evening, lads. Hope you're well. It's the start of his reign. And who thought we would be sitting where we are right now before the season started? All our creative players are injured at the moment. Well, I think this is a good opportunity to transition to a main question, really, that is in the title of the show here. With nearly a third of the season gone, Colin, Spurs are fifth on 18 points and are level with Villa, United, Liverpool, and Bournemouth. The Premier League table is absolutely packed, with Everton being in 13th, but they're only 3 points behind us. Where do you make of Spurs so far with almost a third of the season gone? Are we overachieving, underperforming?
Right. Deep breath for this one. Right. I do think we are. I know probably go down like a lead balloon. This. I think we're slightly overachieving. All right. Now, my qualification for that is new manager, an absolute bucket load of injuries. So I think in terms of our points return and where we are in the league and whatever, I actually think it's pretty okay for where we are 11 games into the Premier League. However, I do think the league this year is pretty poor. And I think that the table is very kind to us. We're sitting in 5th at the moment. I just loaded it up while you were asking the question, because I remember looking at it a couple of days ago. We're 5th in the league with 18 points, but like Crystal Palace are in 10th and 17th. Like, there's 5 of us sitting on 18th, on 18 points. We could easily be in 9th if we had an inferior goal difference. So I think the league isn't very good. And I think the table has been pretty kind to us so far because there's so much congestion there. So in my view, we are probably doing okay, slightly on the positive side, considering the injuries and considering we've got a brand new manager.
And to you then, Jack, it's a big one. I think we'll probably circle around on this. Underachieving, overperforming.
I would say we're overperforming in our league position, but underperforming probably on the pitch. There's been a few games where maybe we've gotten the rub of green. I think a lot of the games we've lost, you kind of go, well, there was never a scenario where we won that, particularly the Chelsea game. Like, I just don't see how we would have ever won that, even with all the luck in the world. I think short of Sanchez throwing one into his own net, I don't think we even would have scored a goal. So I think there's been some positives, particularly with the defensive stuff out of possession, but also we've actually seen regression for the in possession stuff now, not to kind of go back over previous points. But yeah, I guess the real positives would be maybe someone like Odegaard looking like he's starting to click with a bit of form. It's obviously a shame now that Bergvall and Gray are both injured, because they were maybe 2 guys you looked at as young players that maybe would kick on this season. And obviously you've had Colomwani, that was an exciting signing. He's missed a huge amount of football and he looks like he's going to miss another 4 to 6 weeks again. Like, that's Like he gets a dead leg and then a broken jaw. Like for a footballer to miss that much football with those two injuries, like it's not like a torn hamstring and I don't know a broken ankle. Like these are fairly obscure injuries he's picking up.
Yeah.
So I think there is a degree of bad luck, and I think Frank does deserve leeway. But at the same time, Kulusevski and Madison got injured in pre-season. We brought in Javi as a result. Kulusevski, we knew going into the season that he was going to be missing until around Christmas. So I think he had time to plan for this lack of creativity, and he did get a signing in Javi, who I think he's not utilising correctly. Now I think he's gradually improving, as Colin said. I thought that the United game was probably his best Premier League performance, and I think anyone that maybe said it wasn't a great performance, I think that maybe was battered away by the fact that the substitution taking him off was actually booed by the crowd, which shows maybe whereas against Chelsea he was subbed on and subbed off, and from being at the game I didn't hear a single person booing when he was taken off against Chelsea. So I think that's at least a positive for Xavi. Now, not a positive for Frank that his substitutions are getting booed. He got out of jail. The fact that I think it was Tell came on from, he scored a goal, a brilliant goal, I think. But even Tell, I maybe haven't seen an improvement in him, but he's obviously gotten 2 goals. I think he's played, around 200 minutes. And I guess as we were talking about Johnson earlier, I think Johnson has 2 goals in the league in probably about twice as many minutes, maybe 2.5 times as many minutes. So I think it'd be ideal if Tell maybe could start getting minutes over Johnson or Richarlison. I think maybe that could be something that could get him a bit of positives. I think if you go with maybe the more youthful approach, I think, and playing a more attractive brand of football, even if the results aren't great, I think that'll be something that'll get a bit more fan patience. It's when you're pulling out that style of football, as soon as results go badly, you know how it goes. Look how much time Ange got just based on the football he was playing and how much he got people to buy into it versus you saw Mourinho. As soon as things went bad under Mourinho, he just couldn't turn around. Nuno the same. You're seeing Frank, we're getting booed off at halftime, full-time, most home games. So I think just a bit more positivity, and I think fans will really get behind him. You just need to see what he's trying to build. And if you're going, look, we're willing to wait until next season, maybe next season you have some of the younger players are a bit more developed, we're playing an attractive brand of football. You go, look, we can look to build in the league position, and maybe next season you target one of the cups with a view to then third season is when you really kick on and maybe go for one of the big ones. And I'm not expecting Thomas Frank to bring us a Premier League or a Champions League, but if you can get to where Pochettino was, where you're at least giving yourselves a chance, I think if we could see some possibility of that, I think that would get him a lot of leeway. But it's just so far I'm looking at him and going, is he maybe just going to keep doing this same thing in a year's time? I'm not really seeing a huge amount of adaptation. So I think, which is one of the big reasons I wanted him, was because of how much he adapted with Brentford. So I think, just a bit more something we can look forward to him building on, I think would really, really improve how fans view him. But I think ultimately the fans will decide probably by Christmas whether he's going to be in this job for very long.
And Dave, I think the big, maybe seeing where we are in the table, I would absolutely take it, right, where we are in the table at the minute. But I think I don't really know what to make of us. Like, are we just really lucky to be where we are at the minute? Is it the most competitive season in a while, says G&D here? That's also kind of been on my mind. Is everyone kind of also just shit and we're also a bit shit? And then that's kind of just where the table lies at the minute. That's what I'm struggling with. But I would also say maybe getting knocked out in the cup was kind of the big blow for me maybe this season, the Newcastle game. I wonder if we had gotten into the next round after the Newcastle game, maybe we would be a bit more positive about the season so far. That's all.
Yeah, no. Look, it's a bit of an awkward one, right? Because, look, let's be honest. I was expecting a new manager bounce when he came in. Ange got off to a 10-game start. Jose got off to a good start. Nuno got off to a decent start. Conte got off to a good start. But my question is how long is it going to last? And how is Frank going to survive the period of, what would you call the difficult period that a lot of managers failed to sort of overcome? The only one that's really managed to overcome that difficult period was Pochettino, but that's because he was brave. He binned off Adebayor, Holtby, players like that, turned to the likes of, players from the academy and stuff like that. He was brave, and you argue he sort of got his reward off the back of that. But with Thomas
sorry, Dave, would you consider Richarlison and Brennan Johnson maybe to be the equivalent of your Adebayors and your Kabils?
I think it's approaching that situation. I think it is. At the end of the day, what you get out of them on the pitch is nowhere near enough to be able to sort of go and win you games or help change games, even if you bring them off the bench. Like, for instance, Johnson scored against Copenhagen, great. But he could have done much better at the back post. So could Pedro Porro, by the way. But like, that's been consistent of them last season and the season before, where they're just not learning. Richarlison, look, one game he looks like Brazil's number 9. The next game he's absolutely fucking useless. He looks like he wouldn't even get a game for Ireland. And the standards low there. He wouldn't even get a game for Luxembourg at times with the way he plays. So I think it's approaching that, and I think it is approaching a situation where, at what point do you just go, look, that's a lost cause. They're not taking on my instructions. They're not, producing on the football pitch. At what time do I turn to someone like a Dane Scarlett or, someone like that and give them an opportunity? But I think, look, that's another day's conversation, because I've said before, I think it's a club instruction that they'd rather give opportunities to people that they've paid big money for, people that they're paying big wages for, rather than give academy graduates a chance. Like, Tim Sherwood really had to dig his flag in the ground and risk his job to give Harry Kane his opportunity. He famously speaks about that. But look, in general, Frank got off to a good start, but I would argue the fixture list allowed us to get off to a good start. We had some of our easier Champions League fixtures at the start. We also had easy Premier League fixtures. I was always looking at, off the back of the last international break, where you had a lot of these tough fixtures coming up. This was always going to be the true test of this Tottenham team and what we can sort of achieve this year. And let's be honest, since the last international break, our form has tailed off dramatically. Performances and performance levels, I think, have tailed off as well. I think we should be concerned about the amount of points we're squandering at home. I mean, that alone is going to jeopardize you finishing in a European position in the league. That's mainly where a lot of teams sort of build up the bulk of their points. I think the pragmatic approach is also becoming a huge frustration. You can hear fans starting to boo now, and them noises are becoming louder and louder, and they're very hard to quell. So when you look at it, and like to Steve D's point in the comments, he also says, look, stats can be manipulated. Like, we're saying we're not creating a lot, but we're one of the highest scorers in the league. And I get what you're saying, but I think where we're at right now is the stats initially look good because we were beating the likes of Burnley, Leeds, and stuff like that. But since we've come back off the last international break, we've won one game in the Premier League, one game. And what you're seeing is now, a lot of them teams that maybe didn't get off to a good start are starting to catch up to us. The likes of your Chelseas and all, they're just starting to get going. And, you look at us, we've got the North London Derby coming up. We've got PSG coming up. We've got Newcastle away coming up. It doesn't get any easier. And it's just one of them, like, we could very well be down in 12th or 13th come the end of them, come off the back of them two fixtures. And all of a sudden you're looking at it from a complete different lens, because then you're looking at it and going, yeah, we've got off to a good start, but when we're coming up against teams that we will be battling to try and get a European position next season, we're failing at every single hurdle, and we're not even laying a glove on them when the tactics aren't, brave enough to go and try and lay a glove on them. And I think that will become very, very frustrating. But I think as long as Frank has Champions League football, and it looks like we're going to get out into the next round, I think that will keep him in the job. I think it's when European football is done and dusted, if we're out of the FA Cup, you're out of the League Cup, and all of a sudden we're a bit off qualifying for Europe, then all of a sudden I think you look at it, and that's where the questions will come in. But I think it's far too early to go now, but there are things that Frank has to do to be brave, to sort of push forward through this difficult period. Like, maybe look at some of them youngsters through this injury crisis, give them their opportunity, take the handbrake off a little bit, let the team play with a little bit more freedom, and I think there are certain things he can do that will, if he does, and even if it doesn't work out results-wise, fans will get behind it, Jack. Fans will give him an opportunity because they're trying to see what they can see what he's trying to do, and the fact that he's trying different things to sort of come out of this problem. It's when you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results is when fans sort of start losing their rag. So right now, I think Frank is safe, but I think it's something that we'll have to maybe re-talk about February, March, assess where we're at, and take it from there. But right now, the season can go either way. We could come back off this international break, start looking resilient, get a bit of confidence, and push on. Or if you suffer another defeat in the North London Derby, beat badly by PSG and Newcastle, all of a sudden you're in a realm where no one has any confidence in what they're doing, and that's where fractions usually start to appear. So it's one of them. I think off the back of this international break is huge for Tottenham.
I think it seems to be very much in the middle between underperforming or overachieving. The only really big blow, I think, for me this season was the way that we handled that Newcastle game. It felt like, yes, it was going to be difficult to go to their place and pick up a win, but for some reason, almost like the United game, it felt like Newcastle weren't anything that special. It felt like they were potentially beatable, and it's just the team that we selected, sort of the manner in which we went out. It felt like we could have potentially gotten over the line there, and I think that would have done wonders for maybe me personally, as well as maybe others in the fan base. And when it comes to where we are in the league, I think I would take it going a third into the season. I wasn't really expecting the football to be that brilliant, to be honest, under Thomas Frank. I just knew that certain things were going to be fixed pretty quickly when it came to set pieces and when it also came to also just defending a bit more organized. And I think he's achieved that, but I wasn't really under any illusion that the football was going to somehow be brilliant, going forward. So where we are in the league, I'm pretty happy with, but maybe it was just getting knocked out of the cup was a big blow for me at this point too. Yeah. But another question though, that maybe we'll bring up, Colin, I mean, it's a big question and it's probably a hard one to predict, but with where everyone else is in the league, I mean, do you think Spurs actually have a realistic chance of finishing in a European place, maybe top 6?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'd be at this stage. I'd be optimistic if we keep building the way we're building, and hopefully we can get a bit of consistency into our home form. And this is obviously, it's hard to tell how far you'll go in the Champions League. How long is a piece of string? I suspect we won't go too far in that competition with where we are. But I do, for all my fears around Frank and what he can do in the future, I do feel he is a steady hand. And that's probably why he got appointed, was because he would be a steady hand after the kind of chaotic nature of what Ange Postecoglou brought. But I was a big Ange fan, by the way. So I do feel he is a calming influence on most of our setup in the club. And I'm hoping that that'll start to bear fruit, because I do feel, and it is very, very difficult, because I've gone from watching one of the poorest performances I've ever seen for a long, long time against Chelsea, and how disheartened I was after that. And I think I actually said on this podcast that was the first time I really started to doubt him. But I felt the opposite way after watching United. But again, the context of the team that you're playing against, United are no great shakes, but they are a similar club to us, or in a similar position to us, if you can understand in terms of the evolution, although Amarin is a year ahead of him. So I do feel if we get, this is all obviously with a bit of luck on our side and the wind at our backs, but if we get players back and our youth play the position or make a contribution that I think that they can, and if we stay steady, because we do play pretty okay away from home, that's why I'm optimistic about the North London derby, that we can stay there or thereabouts. If the likes of, and I know Dave's going to kill me for saying it, but if you do get a Kulusevski coming back, or a Maddison coming back, or a Solanke coming back, and they do very well, and Bergvall starts to kick on from where he was from last season, then why not? Or Johnson finds a bit of form, or Frank finds a way to unlock Johnson a bit more, or Odeberg continues his upward, what I consider to be an upward trajectory at the moment, and Tell continues his upward trajectory, and he'll obviously get a lot of games because he's not in the Champions League squad. And Xavi, please Xavi comes in and keeps doing what he's doing, then I do feel, we could still have a very positive season. And just to touch, I'm not trying to pick you up on it too much, Dave, but I don't really feel the Xavi one is at Frank's door. And I understand what you're saying. Yeah, the manager can do more to unlock him or whatever, but I blame the club for that. We always seem to do this rubbish where we know we have a need and we try and fill it with something. Like, why not go out and buy an established number 10 if you had a need? Instead, we went and we bought Xavi, who was, okay, admittedly ripping it up in another league, but he's quite slight. I don't mean any disrespect to him, but he's quite slight and not a Premier League footballer, right? End of. He's never going to come in and set the world on fire. He's always going to need time. It's very rare somebody arrives in and sets the world on fire in the Premier League. So I don't really blame Frank for that one. I know he could potentially use him better and keep playing him through the middle rather than out wide when he did at the start of the season. But I blame the club for that one. I just, we know what the problem was. Why not just go and bloody buy the solution? We're not a poor club. Anyway, I got that off my chest.
Went after probably 4 other number 10s before him as a Morgan Gibbs-White, Morgan Rogers. We put in a late bid for as well, so he might have been like 4th or 5th.
But all badly managed. as usual in our bloody club. But anyway, yes, to finish on an optimistic note, I think we'll finish between 4th and 6th, and fingers crossed we do.
I would certainly take that. To you, Jack, I mean, do you see realistic chances of us finishing that high up?
I'd probably say around somewhere between 5th and 7th. I think the top 4, I think, is pretty not set in stone, but I think there's a clear 4 best teams in the league. Maybe Chelsea might suffer from a bit of fatigue just from having a very short break over the summer, but I think Liverpool will rediscover some form, so I expect them to still get top 4, and then obviously our horrible neighbours and Man City. I think Man City are starting to really click again, so I think those 4 are ahead of everyone else. And then Man United just not having Europe. I think if we didn't have Europe, I'd say we're an absolute banker for 5th at the very worst, because just having a week to prepare for games mentally, physically, tactically, it just makes life so much easier in the current climate. I think that's a big problem that I think a lot of mid-table managers will have coming into bigger clubs, is actually trying to navigate the 2 games a week. I think everyone talks about Glasner or Real. I think they'll struggle with that as well in the Premier League. But I think I think it was Colin, you said that just about if we get knocked out of Europe early, or was it Dave that said if we get knocked out of Europe early,
Yeah.
I think we're pretty much guaranteed top 6, to be honest. But if we go far in that, I think similar to last season, it could maybe get a little bit ugly in the league. You're looking at maybe 8th, 9th, but I think I'm not expecting anything like last season, essentially. But and also, it depends on injuries. You can't control that. You don't know who's going to go down injured. Van de Ven and Romero both go down for 3 months. But I don't know what we want to do.
You may pick a League of Ireland team then, Jack.
Yeah, I think so. You can't really predict. There's certain players we literally cannot play without. I think Romero and Van de Ven are the 2 obvious ones. I think Udogie, if we don't sign a left back in January, if he goes down long term, I think we're in trouble as well. I think the front 4, I think even Kudus, I think we've actually looked okay without Kudus on the pitch, because I think maybe it's made us explore other avenues of attack, whereas previously we were just looking to play to Kudus. So I think it's the 3 of the back 4, even Porro, I think probably the whole back 4, I think if any of them got injured, but it Spence I trust to play right back. But I think if you're playing Dragusin and Danso together for 3 months straight, I think it could get a little bit nasty, especially with Dragusin just coming back from that long-term injury. But I expect him to make something of an impact, but even still, with some of the young centre-backs we have in our books, I think maybe he'll be one that'll be shifted on in the summer. But I think realistically 5th, 6th, 7th, I think it'd be okay. If we're playing in Europe next year, maybe we have another run to the Europa League final and something like that to look forward to. I don't think Champions League is the be-all and end-all. I think we learned last year that winning a competition is a lot more fun than being in the best competition. Yeah. So if it's Conference League, Europa League, like we've these young guys we have, they're still going to be young. Gray, Bergval, you have Byfield, Luca Williams, Barnett coming through the academy. Vuskovic will be coming into the team next year. If we have Europa League or Conference League, use that as an opportunity to develop these guys in the group stages and then look for them to maybe become first team players. Saw what it did for Bergval last year, playing those few group games. He ended up getting our player of the season in the end. So I think that shows the benefit of maybe playing outside the Champions League, especially when you're a developing side. Sometimes teams just get into it and they're not ready. Newcastle a couple of years ago showed, I think they finished 13th in the league or something after getting Champions League. So I don't think it's as important, especially with all the other revenue that we have coming into the club. I don't think it's as essential as it used to be. So if you offered me 5th or 6th right now, I'd bite your hand off for it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Colin where, well, it's probably contingent on if the league stays as competitive as it is. I feel like, the bookies have probably made an absolute field day this season because not a lot of the games have been that predictable, really. You feel like everyone's taking points off of each other. The fact that Sunderland are so high up the table and almost all of the promoted teams have more or less given it a good crack, like Leeds, Burnley, all of them. It doesn't really feel like the league has been that predictable. And Everton being only 3 points behind us, but being in 13th really does speak to, if the league sticks this way, it just stays really competitive throughout, maybe Spurs can stand a chance actually of finishing relatively higher up. But if maybe things start to, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't maybe go the opposite of evening out, I would imagine we might start slipping a little bit. I think we've almost benefited from teams taking points off of each other week in, week out this season. And maybe it could stay that way, and that would be great for us. And that would be our chance then of finishing, I think, relatively high up. But also, I think it would also depend on someone like what Colin was saying, Xavi Simons, having a good season, coming good. Someone like Solanke coming back into the team, potentially just hitting the ground running. Kolomwani, if he comes back, sort of plays the way that he has been, and then somehow takes it up another level. And potentially an Odebear or someone as well, maybe coming to rise as a hero. I think for us to finish much higher up in the table, it will depend on someone really stepping up other than a Muhammad Kudus. And then also, we know we can rely on the defense, but can we rely on the defense to finish as high as 5th or 6th? I don't know. I think we'll need some players to really step up in the forward line in the creative areas to finish up as high as 5th or 6th. I think our defense could get us inside the top 10. The way we've been playing right now, I could see us finishing inside the top 10. But to finish even higher, we'll need someone like what Colin was saying, a list of players that have been in and out really to all of a sudden step up. Who knows? Could be Brennan Johnson again, for all I know.
What do you think cost him his job?
Huh?
How low do you think we'd have to finish for him to get sacked?
I think bottom half of the table, I think, is a fair
bottom half of the
question.
table and then maybe knocked out of the Champions League,
Do you think he survives 8th or 9th?
I think so. I think he survives. I think many people look at it in terms of league as we stabilised, bit of progress, sort of push on next season. But I think if you're bottom half of the table, you bounce out of the League Cup first round, you're out of Europe, and you don't progress in the FA Cup. I think it spells trouble as a Spurs manager, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I think probably just finishing in a European spot would probably go a pretty long way.
I think any European spot. I don't care. Like Jack says, we have more than enough commercial revenue and revenue from different sources to come in and sustain not being able to get Champions League. Of course, Champions League revenue helps, but it's not the be all and end all in terms of what we can spend in the transfer market.
Yeah. So Dave, just your prediction: are we finishing in the top 6 or not this season?
Well, to your point, Jack, I think you look at, for instance, Nottingham Forest last year. Morgan Gibbs-White had a brilliant season. Chris Wood stepped up with goals. Alanga, Hudson-Odoi. You do need 4 players to step up and be able to win you games at the other end of the pitch. It's of utmost importance if you want to try and finish in and around Europe. And right now, that's the area we're struggling in. And to be honest with you, do I see it improving? Do I see Frank being able to adjust his style of football a little bit? Not quite so sure. And I just think ultimately, I think injuries will probably hold us back as well, to be honest with you. So I think we might fall just outside of that, unfortunately.
Okay. Just top 10 is okay, says Destiny 5. Let us know, everybody, where you would find it acceptable. Jason Bell saying, unless we get a couple good players in January, I think the best we can hope for is a conference league. I think, if Thomas Frank, like Dave said, if he finished pretty high up in the FA Cup, as well took us into maybe a deeper round of the Champions League and, potentially, somewhere higher up in the league, I think that would probably go a decent way with the fan base and probably the board as well. Let's move on to an injury question here, which we have to continue to talk about. I feel like I want to stop talking about injuries. I want to stop talking about home form, but it's all we really can. It's just going to continue to be the main topic, really, unfortunately. Dave, I mean, Tottenham's injury problems just aren't going away. These questions about it just aren't going away. Now that the focus has moved beyond simply blaming Ange Postecoglou like it was last season, what's really behind the consistent injury crisis? Is it training? Is it just bad luck? What do you put it down to? Or is it Ange Postecoglou still?
I'm actually glad we can sort of have a proper conversation around it now, because last year, whenever I tried to highlight it, many people just wanted to blame the manager, which I thought was an absurd narrative, to begin with, because people really didn't do their digging into it. I've done a bit more research today just to sort of help get my point across. But you go back to Jose Mourinho, and it's well documented, it's well printed out there. Jose had frustrations about the players' lack of fitness and physicality while in charge at Spurs. Players turning up late for training, overweight, etc. And Jose suffered injury crisis while he was here. Conte also came in and told the players they were not fit enough and overweight. He had to remove things from vending machines, sandwiches and that from canteen after training and stuff. And Conte also suffered an injury crisis. At times, he also had to name academy players on the bench that no one wanted to highlight. Then you go into Ange Postecoglou. You know, he was also blamed for Spurs having a large number of players out due to his intense training methods and his intense method on the pitch. You know, people blame that for the cause, but the theory is well and truly been proven wrong now, considering Thomas Frank isn't known as being as demanding in terms of training sessions and his style on the pitch, and we have a similar problem, if not worse. And, you know, when you go back to what Postecoglou said, he described it as the most extreme of circumstances. And now that Frank is also in a similar position, this is our third season in the trot, by the way, because Ange suffered injuries in both seasons. You now have to start looking inwards at the physio department and the sports science department, you know, and I think that's where your problem lies. I mean, the fact that they're having that content to come in and remove certain things out of the canteen is a huge concern. You know, you had to remove fizzy drinks and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, also under Postecoglou came out and said the club undertook a major review of its medical department, you know, which began with the departure then of the long-serving head of medicine and sports science in the summer. What was his name? The South African guy. I can't remember his name now, but, you know, I think it was Geoff Scott, I think, something like that. Mm-hmm. You know, apparently they had a war of words over it, and it cost Geoff Scott his job. But, you know, since then, Tottenham have gone and announced the appointment of Dan Lewenden. You know, he'll oversee medical, sports science, nutrition, and psychology, you know, across the men's and women's, you know, teams and the academy teams. And I think, finally, we might be actually trying to get to the root cause of the problem, because my point being, when it's happened under Jose, when it's happened under Conte, when it's happened under Postecoglou and now Thomas Frank, you can't pin it on one manager, his methods or anything like that. They all have different styles, different intensities, different demands, but they've all complained more or less about the same sort of thing. At some point, you have to start looking inwards, and I'm glad the club have done that with the internal review. They brought in this guy. He was in the City group. He oversaw, you know, a couple of their teams and stuff like that. He was also involved in that side in terms of tennis and stuff like that. So he's got a long outstanding history in terms of sports science and stuff like that. And my argument before was maybe that Geoff Scott, because he had been there so long and stuff, that maybe sometimes people can become a little bit outdated. Sometimes teams move on. And I felt like that was the case with Geoff Scott. He was at the club like 20 years. You know, but sports science and all, nutrition, everything else was starting to be introduced to keep these athletes at an optimal level. And I just think maybe that's where we failed. And I'm glad that the club have brought in this guy, Dan Lewenden. And now hopefully, you know, given time, you know, we would hopefully start to see that injury crisis sort of relieve a little bit, but it has to be, because when you look at it, the amount of injuries we pick up, the amount of times we get players back, then they're back out injured again. You know, there's got to be something in it in terms of recovery, rehabilitation, nutrition, all that side of things. And I think that's something that we really have to focus on now moving forward.
And to you, Colin, Jason Bell saying, I think it's been 10 years since we had a season without major injury issues. I mean, it's also Tango Ben Al-Shid saying if it happens every season, it doesn't seem to be a crisis. What do you put it down to?
It always seems to be on the extreme side of the scale.
Yeah.
Well, just while Dave was speaking very eloquently about that and made his points very, very well, I just Googled. I'd never actually bothered to do it before. I kind of pick up all your news as you're listening to the BBC or Sky or whoever. I just Googled it. So there is a very interesting site which tells us that we're in double figures in the Premier League. So we've 12 out injured. And the next nearest to that is Chelsea with 8. And also Newcastle United with 8. So we have nearly 40% more injuries than the next worst team. So that does point to exactly what Dave is saying, that whatever we're doing systemically within the club is not right. We're not minding our players as well. The only thing I will say is that it's a bit of a change in injury type. So when Ange was there, we were picking up a lot of hamstring muscle strains. These appear to be knocks and bangs and whatever else, but it still does kind of point to the same thing. I mean,
still points to that we're not robust enough, right?
That's exactly what it points to. Yeah. And famously, obviously, Antonio Conte getting rid of the tomato ketchup, which will always tickle me until my dying days.
Sandwiches. I mean, I don't know. Some of the stuff you had to get rid of blew my mind.
But it's what really irritates me about Spurs is that when we do pick up a raft of injuries, it never really seems to be something simple, like somebody's just banged their big toe off the bunk bed getting up in the morning and they're going to miss a couple of days. It's always something like Colin Moani going off with a fucking fractured cheek. I mean, when was the last time anybody saw that?
Yeah.
The dead leg is classic. You know, like Dragusin, ACL, Madison, was it 2 ACLs in a row he did?
MCL, then ACL.
MCL, then ACL. Thank you, Jack. Keep me right and proper, young man. Well done. So it's always the nuclear end of the scale. Like, there's this little imp in the back of the stadium just pressing the nuclear injury button all the time. It's never something simple. It's always something massive, always something that's going to take them ages to recover from and ages to get back into form, which is actually what really irks me. But when you actually look at it as starkly as I'm looking at here to my left-hand side in an EPL injury table, it's just astonishing how many we have and the seriousness of them all. It's just so frustrating. So hopefully, and I do, obviously, having had a long working career myself, when you do go to make changes in a big organization, they will take time to implement and bear fruit. So hopefully we start to see the good outcomes from the review that's taken place and the changes that have been made.
I made a joke to Dave, or I sent him some tweets where when they discovered the Solanke injury, they described it as just a knock. You know, he's been out for 4 or 5 months, you know, and even Kulusevski had his injury. Ange Postecoglou said, I spoke to the medical team. They don't think it's too serious. Might just be a knock. You know, he's going to be out for nearly like a calendar year. It's just insane, you know, with the diagnoses as well.
Is that not Solanke right now, though? I mean, how frustrating is that? I still don't know what's wrong with that man. I know it's a foot injury or something.
Well, I think what was crazy is they took like 2 months to decide to do surgery. Like that was also baffling to me. It's like, surely you wait like a week or two, but the fact that I think they took like a whole month to decide whether to do the surgery or not.
But again, that's an internal issue, right? Our people in the club not making that making that decision.
Yeah.
But how frustrating, a £60 million, I can't remember now, the Jack will put me right, a £60 million, thank you, £65 million player. He's the linchpin of our forward line. And I really want to use a bad word, but I don't want to. We're just messing around. Why aren't we being professional and just diagnosing these, deciding on a path instead of this kind of wishy-washy, you know, like, we think he'll be back and then he's not back. Oh, he's going to need surgery now. And it's like the Krusty the Clown show. Like, who's in charge? Who's making these decisions? You know, get it right. It's not hard to get it right, you know, and put these guys back on track. But now, we had to wait 4 or 5 extra weeks while we made these decisions. Now he's had surgery. Now, I mean, for goodness sake. Anyway, I'm getting very frustrated on this one tonight.
Furthermore, though,
sorry, just quickly, the fact that we only hired this Dan guy, you know, on the last international break, even though Geoff Scott was gone last season. I mean, why are we dragging our heels on that as well? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we might be looking for the right fit. Yeah. Well, it could be money. If it's Spurs, it's more than likely money. But you know, recruitment can be difficult. I mean, we see that with players all the time. I mean, and again, you are talking about the top end of the market. So getting the right guy for the right money in the right, you know, somebody who wants to come to you might be difficult. I'm not excusing it, Dave, not in any way. But even from my own professional experience, it can be hard to find the right fit. So you'd rather take some time and get it right than rush in and try and get something done that ultimately turns out to be the wrong fit. So I'd allow them a little bit of space on that, but not diagnosing somebody's, you know, injury and deciding what to do. Poor old Solanke must have been pulling his hair out. Or, well, maybe for his wages, I'd sit at home too. But
maybe also some of these doctors and sports scientists have more clients at Spurs because the injury list is so long than they actually do a regular day at work. They're actually probably, you know, having longer days at Spurs than they would actually in their own regular jobs. Furthermore, though, what's crazy about Spurs is that we've also brought in some players that had almost no history of injuries. In the case of Solanke, right? He only had like 1 injury his whole career. And then he's just been made of glass since he's come here. The case as well with Kolomoani, right? Kolomoani's had 2 bizarre injuries, but he never really had any as well. And I think there are a couple other case examples. But Jack, I mean, what do you put it down to? Is it Ange Postecoglou's ghost, you know, pulling the strings, or is it something else?
I think it's probably a mix of factors. I think the main thing is squad depth. We never have squad depth, and the same players get played every single week because Kane and Son, the classic examples. Luckily, they didn't get a huge amount of injuries. Kane obviously had the ankle injuries seemingly every year, but it was like if we're playing a Premier League game, Kane and Son are playing. They never get rested. we can't trust Vincent Janssen or Nkudu to play, and that's just the case. You can run through probably 10 players. I've written down here, Kudus, he got injured, played pretty much every single minute for us the whole season, and then got injured. I think that was quite obviously coming. Kulusevski played the equivalent of a season by the time February rolled around, got a stress fracture in his foot. Like, footballers getting stress fractures, how much running is he doing? And then he comes back and does his knee and he's out for the rest of the year. So he essentially missed the entirety of 2025 due to his exploits in 2024. And then Solanke under Ange was used as a battering ram, sprinting around the pitch, pressing constantly. Due to Richarlison never being fit, there wasn't an option to rest Solanke. So I don't think it's a coincidence those three guys have missed a lot. I think some of it's bad luck. I think Kolo Muani and Bergval, like Bergval getting hit in the face by a football and getting concussed. You could have, for all the will in the world, you can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
Kolo Muani catching an elbow and breaking his jaw, that's bad luck as well. But you've got to account for some amount of bad luck. Every team will get injuries, especially playing twice a week. Just the odds of you getting injured. And I think Dave said about the recurrence of injuries, that basically the amount of players come back and they're straight away out with the same injury. Van de Ven last season, hamstring injury, three separate times. Well, sorry, 3 times rolling, he came back and immediately was out then for.
He also, on that, Jack, he went outside the club to seek specialist treatment, and Everton has to fix the issue.
I remembered that after the Elfsborg game, he played 45 minutes, and I think he was complaining about tightness in his hamstring then. I think they actually, in fairness, they were very proactive with that, obviously with Van de Ven probably pushing for that. I think they did training with him on how he is running. Yeah. So I think he's actually just as run style. Touchwood, he hasn't had any injuries since, but I think the rotation thing, we've got to be careful with Van de Ven because we can't afford for him to get injured. Odegaard was the same. Odegaard tore his hamstring against Coventry in the Cup, came back, played 15 minutes against Alkmaar, tears his hamstring again. Next thing you know, we're hearing, he's having surgery. Ben Davies, obviously not the most important squad member, he pulled his hamstring, came back. I don't even think he played a game. I think he pulled it again in training. And Maddison, obviously, he came back from a knee injury and then tears his, not the same injury, but his ACL then tears the same knee. You question maybe, was he fully rehabbed when he came back? Because I would have said a reason for an injury would be that weakness in other areas of the knee would cause the ACL to snap. So maybe that's bad luck. Maybe it's related. So I think that's certainly something to account for. And then Kulusevski and Dragusin, in fairness, they were injured coming into the season. We knew that. So I think maybe unfair to paint them in the same light as the other ones. I think that's kind of a separate issue. So I think there's plenty of factors, but I think the big thing is if we can get better squad depth where we don't feel we have to play Kudus every game, we don't have to play Romero every game, we don't have to play Van de Ven every game, we don't have to play Paro every game. I think how Paro hasn't gotten injured since being at that club is beyond me. He plays 90 minutes twice a week, every single week. And you can see in his performances he's struggling physically, I think. I think it's quite obvious. Yeah, but like he's a guy who leaves everything out on the pitch, and they don't give him a rest. I think you're just waiting for him to get a Kulusevski type injury. To avoid resting him for 2 or 3 games, you're probably going to end up missing him for 6 months. Then he gets a serious injury. I think there's too many guys like that. Udogie, I do like how they're managing Udogie. Obviously, it wasn't nice against Man United to not have Udogie starting, and you have the frustration with the left wing. But I think long term, I think we were better off because if Udogie starts that game, goes down injured in the second half, you go, Frank shouldn't have played him 2 games a week coming back from an injury. So I think Frank is looking to rectify that, and you can see the intensity in some games is a bit less, which, while frustrating, is to manage players' fitness. So I think that is something that maybe we have to have a bit of patience with, and hopefully it bears fruits for Frank, that we're looking in April and going, well, we only have 4 injuries and every other team playing 2 games a week has 9, 10, 11 injuries. And maybe we're on the other side of the spectrum, and then we're going, Frank is maybe the genius that we didn't quite understand at the start, where he managed the squad properly early on in the season, and now we're bearing the fruits of it. So I think maybe I'm doing whatever the opposite of devil's advocate is. Maybe I'm doing that.
I think you raised some very valuable points. I think squad depth has always been an issue to a certain degree. Managers having to rely on, core of maybe 14 players. I fully take that point. But, Frank can rotate all he wants. We're still picking up injuries, and he can try and protect players as much as he wants. But in order for him to protect them, when you're really only getting one training session in between games, that's where you are relying on sports science, recovery, and all that side of stuff. And, if he's going to be, trying to manage these players, you also have to pair that up with the nutrition side, the sports science side, the recovery side. You watch any documentaries across any sports when it comes to athletes nowadays, they all speak about how important that side is to be able to maintain a certain level. So, there's only so much Frank can do in terms of managing the workload, yes. But it also has to be paired up with the other side to be able to keep these players from injuries and stuff like that, and putting them in the optimal position to be able to get out on the pitch and perform and stuff like that. It has to be paired up. It can't just solely be on Thomas Frank.
I just want to add that I agree with Dave's point that there has to be something going on internal. Like we gave a bunch of examples of just the ludicrous nature of them diagnosing things to just the way that they're handling the injuries in general. I think with the players nowadays, a lot of it also is down to them and taking care of their own bodies, because with the amount of games that they're playing now, they are being overplayed. But you do see a lot of people are always saying, oh, you can't play 2 games a week, this sort of thing. You see plenty of examples of guys that are playing 2 or 3 games a week on a pretty regular basis. But what they all seem to have in common is, from what I can tell, they seem like guys that sort of almost treat it as a 24/7 type of job, where they're of course doing their training and doing their fitness at the gym when they are with the club, but then they're doing things off of the pitch as well. Pedro Porro, case example, he's spoken about how much he does outside of just the gym at the training center. He does all these other things to invest in his body to make sure that he can play 4,000 minutes a season. Holland just came out with his own little thing about how much he does outside of the pitch to make sure
his videos are brilliant.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like a 24/7 thing where he's like buying, like, what is it, raw milk, to having, the Italian fitness guy come see him 2 or 3 times a day. He has his own cryo chambers. You look at someone like Højbjerg as well, seemed to be able to play almost every single minute. From what I can tell from the outside, that guy was doing plenty of things outside of the gym, working really hard over the off season.
Ronaldo's famous for it.
Yeah, Ronaldo's famous for it. Even you would say, even say like players that are playing up until their 40s, right? They must be doing something, right? Like I think Sergio Ramos is still playing at 40 years old. Modric is still playing at like 40 years old. These are guys that are, probably doing things outside of the pitch to keep themselves at this sort of level. Even Sonny and Harry Kane, you're right. Harry Kane had his ankle issues, but eventually he saw someone outside of the Spurs medical team to fix that ankle.
Physio.
And he's not a guy that's like off partying over the off season. He's not a guy that's doing sort of these extra stuff. I do wonder if some of it is down to the players where, they live nice lives. They go off to various clubs or they do various things that, enjoy their life. They're welcome to do that. But if they want to stay injury free, they could also look at some of these other players that don't seem to be doing that type of thing, I'm going to sound like Graham Souness here, but aren't like doing Fortnite streams or like things like that. They're actually making sure that their body is 100% capacity to the best of their ability. It seems like some players do that, other players don't. And I think that's also huge. Like James Maddison might be a good example, like of a guy that very good footballer. I think we all know he enjoys his time off of the pitch as well, not maybe doing the things like Erling Haaland is or whatnot.
Absolutely. And I think, listening to everybody here, I think the conclusion is squad depth takes a slice of the pie. How these players are living outside of, Tottenham Hotspur also takes a slice of the pie. And I think, when you look at it, sports science and that also takes a slice of the pie, because, when these guys are coming back, when they're going into the summer break and stuff like that, they're given plans by the club, to be able to maintain their fitness at home and stuff like that. That happens at all elite level sports all across the board, where, in the off season, they're given ways of maintaining their fitness and stuff like that. So I think, look, it's a combination of everything really, isn't it?
Surely, yeah.
Sorry, Dave. Just on your point of about the sports science, I was just thinking as well. Like some of these guys, they come into the club. The club do extensive medicals, and someone like Richarlison, they surely sensed something was off with his body coming in. He had a lot of injury problems at Everton. I think that's something that you maybe have to raise. Maddison as well. What did Leicester fans say? Maddison spent a third of the season out injured.
Yeah,
I think some of these guys, they're just maybe we avoid signing players that are just missing a third of the season every year in their early 20s. Like, I think someone that's been touted as a really high quality youngster who I really rate as players, Adam Wharton, but he's had a lot of injury issues for 20-year-old. I think that would be a red flag for a lot of clubs. If you're going to spend 100 million on him, you want to be certain he's not going to just have his body fall apart in his mid-20s. Like, these guys they're assets at the end of the day. You can't have them just falling apart and being completely useless to you 18 months down the line after signing them, because you're not going to be able to sell them then.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, very fair point. If we still have time for it, I think we have a little bit to discuss about Mason Melia. Highly rated Irish talent, is set to join Spurs in January. Dave, what do we know about him as a player, and how ready is he to step up to Spurs in the Premier League? I mean, is he going to be different from, let's say, a Troy Parrott or a Dane Scarlett, type of talent?
Yeah, look, when it comes to Mason Melia, I think, of course, he's arriving here in January, and when Spurs paid the fee for him, it was the record fee of any player leaving the League of Ireland to go abroad, and that sort of has raised his profile a little bit. But before even Spurs got to him, he was being touted, he's being chased by Celtic, Frankfurt, a team out in Italy, I think, Chelsea, Everton, Man City. They were courting this guy for quite some time. They were offering him over for trials and stuff like that. But he chose Tottenham Hotspur himself, And when you look at his agent, his name is Clive Clark. He played, it's his uncle as well. He played in England. So he's also got sort of, like Gray, like Bergvall, he's sort of got someone that's been there and done it that can sort of help guide him along his way. But when you look at Mason Melia, I think it's important to understand maybe why Spurs have gone after him. Well, he made his League of Ireland debut at 15. Now, look, that is becoming a bit more of a common a trend, over the last couple of years. It's not as amazing as it once was, especially in the League of Ireland, Northern Ireland League. A lot of players are making their debuts now at 15 and 16 and stuff like that. But I think it's the experience as well that he arrives at Tottenham with, Jack. He's played nearly 100 competitive games already for an 18-year-old. He's played in some big games, cup finals, Champions League qualifiers. So he comes here with a lot of experience, 6'2", and when I've done a bit of digging into, his time in Ireland, St. Pat's, Bray, even the team up in Wicklow, and even Ole Gunnar Solskjaer after a qualifier against Besiktas. They've got mad praise for the guy. Everyone says the same things about him. How good he is in the box. He's a fox in the box. He seems to be in the right place at the right time, makes very clever movement. But that's also combined with a very mature finisher. They all say his finishing ability is way above what someone at his age sort of usually demonstrates. And that's combined with very hard work out of possession. And you're getting a guy that has been given, the player that I think was the youngest player to ever win, I think Player of the Year in the League of Ireland. He's the youngest goal scorer ever for the Ireland under-21s. And every step up he's made, he's done it with ease. And I think when you look at it in his time in total, I think he scored something like 25 goals and 8 assists across all of his league campaigns for St. Pat's. But last year, he scored 15 of them goals and 5 assists in his last campaign, which shows that he is now maturing into a player that is more or less come League of Ireland, League of Ireland standards, a sort of seasoned vet, and the guy's only 18 years of age. So that's where a lot of the fanfare comes around him. But look, I listened to a podcast. It's 2 guys that sort of, they have connections with a lot of the young Irish players and stuff like that. They do a bit of training with them on the off season and started up a podcast. And I've heard similar stories of players going to Palace, Brighton, where they've played in the League of Ireland, they've played at a good level, a lot of games under their belt, but they end up making the move across to these Premier League teams. But where they struggle massively is the pace and the physicality of the Premier League. It is a huge step up. Like, anyone that listens to players that play in the League of Ireland and all, they all sort of moan about the structure behind the clubs in terms of the training facilities. It's nowhere near on par compared to some of the leagues that they're being going into, and that maybe they're not being given a fair chance when they go over there initially, and that it does take time to make that step up. So that is one step up, that we're going to have to be patient with. I think right now where my concern comes in is that because of our frailties across the front line. Many people are going to instantly look at Mason Elliott like they did with Udebur, like they did with Matisse Tel, and sort of hope that he's the answer straight away. But I would look at it more as a Toko Takai situation. He will come in. It will take time behind the scenes to get him up to speed. Now, I know that Tottenham he has been working with coaches from St. Pat's and Tottenham to try and help, why he's been in the League of Ireland, to help bridge that gap so it's easier for him when he gets over. But a lot of these guys, when they make the step over, they struggle going from competitive environment straight back into academy football. And a lot of them end up coming back across the pond, back into the League of Ireland when it doesn't work out. So I think that people have to realise there's a huge step up from the League of Ireland to the Premier League, and it is going to take time. Now, I was speaking to Republic of Ireland tracker, if anyone knows his work on Twitter, and he's also a part of the Lansdowne Road podcast where he covers Republic of Ireland a lot. Now, he was saying to me that, he sort of was speaking to someone that's close to the camp and that he was promised, sort of it coming straight into the first team, which I sort of struggle to see, him walking straight into the first team environment. So
yeah,
it's one of them. I think he's definitely a hot prospect, but there's still a long way to go before he starts contributing ready for the first team. And I would urge caution on that. And that's not against his talent. It's just I've seen this story repeated so many times before, and they never actually really get the chance in the Premier League.
Jack, do you think he's the guy that will get maybe lost in the very, very talented pool of young Spurs players, or do you think he can break through somehow, maybe compared to many guys that maybe tried to make their way to the first team, but for whatever reason couldn't?
Yeah, I will admit I've fairly limited knowledge of him. I got onto one of the lads, Ollie, who's a big Pats fan, before coming on here about an hour before. He said he's very talented. He said variety of finishes in his arsenal. He says he misses some chances, but that's normal at 18 years of age. But I'd be more concerned if he wasn't getting chances. The fact that he's missing chances showed he could have had 20 goals maybe versus 15. I think, Dave, as you said about him getting a chance in the first team, I find that very hard to believe that he will get a chance in the first team. Maybe they'll look to do as with Takai, they look to assess him for 6 months, and then they go, okay, you're either League One, you're League Two level. You go on that loan, then the summer you maybe spend the 6 months just assessing where he's at, get him in training, see what level he's at. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's very physically developed for an 18-year-old, which I think bodes well. Yeah. Which bodes very well for the Premier League. Like, God, you look at the best strikers in the Premier League, how many of them are slight physically? Like, there's hardly any. So I think his physicality best strikers.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't resist.
No, fair enough. No, strikers. I think that would be as a side point. That would be I more see Tell as a winger, just because. As a Premier League player, I think as a Premier League striker in the current climate, which can change obviously, especially when you're 18, you could be 21, and maybe most teams change the way they play. They're not quite as direct, but as things are at the moment, I think as someone that's physically developed for an 18-year-old, I could see him making it, but I do think he needs maybe, I think somewhere like Leyton Orient, where we've had success previously with Josh Keeley and Jamie Donnelly, and previously about a decade ago, Harry Kane. I think he did all right for us. So maybe that's somewhere, and we have a good connection with that club. I know Notts County as well. We're building up a bit of a rapport with them. I know George Abbott went on loan there last season, and Tyrese Hall is tearing it up there. Yeah. They absolutely love him there. So I think one of those two clubs, I think just somewhere where, we can keep an eye on him, and he's going to get games. At that age, what you need is to be playing 20, 30 games a season. Maybe not have some ability to maybe say, look, hold back on giving them too many minutes, because I think guys at that age, you see them playing 40 games a season at that age, and they start to pick up injuries just from their body's just not quite there yet with, like League One and League Two, you're going to be getting kicked if you're any good. So I think
he's used to that though in the League of Ireland, though, right? It's very, very sort of similar.
That is very true. Yeah, I think the League of Ireland's probably actually ideal for him coming over to the Premier League, especially as a striker, that he's dealing with tough centre backs who are going to rough him up a bit. I think, even from a mental point of view, I think Mikey Moore, has learned a lot out in Scotland. He struggled at first, but now he's
doing well now,
picking up a bit of form with the new manager. So I think getting him a League One or League Two loan, at the end of the day, the most important thing is he's playing games of football. He's learning his trade. We don't need him to be ready for another 3 years. Like, I don't see the rush with young players. I think if we need a striker, go out and buy someone that's 28, 29, 30. There's plenty of them on the market that'll score you 20 league goals in season. Take the pressure off him. I'd rather he develops into that player when he's 23 than into maybe a Richarlison level player and he's ready at 20. I think there's no rush with these guys. I think sometimes you're better off being patient with them and just letting them develop and become who they are rather than rushing them in. And then you look at Odegaard and Tell, look at the stick they've had to put up with from fans. Like that's not what a 20-year-old should have to be putting up with, I don't think.
That's my fear, though, that I think Mason Melia, because of our attacking struggles, people are going to look at that straight away and hopefully, turn to him to being the answer. And I think unnaturally he's going to walk into that environment, and that's where I'm concerned about with him. But I take your point. I think it's very important to get him straight back into finding them a low move and getting them back into competitive football, because when I listen to a lot of these League of Ireland players who have made that jump, they really struggle when they have to go back into academy football, and that competitive environment isn't there, that will to win and stuff, and they almost feel like they're regressing sort of to a certain degree. So
I think training with I think he should be training with the first team. Maybe if you give him 2 or 3 academy games towards the end of the season just to get him some matches, but I want him training with the first team every day. I think probably stepping up into that Dane Scarlett role, I think he's someone that maybe, as much as I'd love for him to do a Harry Kane, I just think it's just too late for him. I think he'll have a change of environment. Maybe you send him somewhere, buyback clause. You have the Man City do that the whole time. You have a buyback clause for 10 million. If he absolutely rips it up there, you bring him back, and maybe he's the solution to the striker problems. But I think Melia stepping up into that role of where if Richarlison and Solanke and Kolo Muani are all injured, you have him as an option off the bench when Tell's starting. Just to think maybe if he plays 200 minutes across the season, maybe 10, 20-minute cameos, that would be incredible for him. But if it's 2 10-minute cameos, that's also not the end of the world. I think just getting him in that first team environment, getting him used to play Premier League footballers and going, this is the level that I need to be at. Looking at, I think Kolo Muani, looking at someone like his level, Solanke as well. I think the two of them, they're not top strikers, but they're very good strikers. I think if he goes, oh, well, that's the level I need to aim to get at, I think that's something that will only benefit him maybe for the 6 months, and then you look to send him out on loan in the summer.
I think you're probably right about sending him on loan. Just make sure it's not to any of the clubs that Russell Martin might be managing. What do you think, Colin? I mean, should he go out on loan?
I'm going to disagree with this. Harry Kane 2.0. He starts in a 4-4-2 with Dominic Solanke in January. Job done.
Maybe against Arsenal.
How big is the step up, Colin, from the League of Ireland to English leagues?
I think definitely a prospect, and a bit like Jack, I've done my research tonight. I had heard of him before, but almost completely forgotten about him because it was announced back in February. And I think it's really important he's managed correctly. And I think I don't think there's too much more I can add than the very good points my fellow contributors have already made. Managing him will be so important, particularly since they'll be tempted to rush if he is as good as we hope he will be, particularly with his physique. But with physique, we know doesn't come mentality. And certainly with, ability in football doesn't necessarily come maturity and decision-making. So I hope he is managed correctly, and he is a prospect. And I think it's good for the League of Ireland that we're finally starting to see some big money signings happening, and hopefully there's more to come, because we could really do with that money over here in grassroots football. And it's great that he's gone to Spurs. So I certainly wish him well, and I don't think I have too much more to add to what the boys have already said.
Just quickly, 2 more quick things to add is, it's important to know that this guy picked Tottenham. Frankfurt tried to rush a deal when they sold Marmoush last January. When they sold Marmoush to City, they tried to rush him and bring him in. Everton were courting him for quite some time. Man City were glazing over him. Celtic invited him out. He chose Tottenham after speaking to Tottenham representatives and Ange Postecoglou supposedly. So he chose Tottenham. He chose to come here. So I think that's important to know. And what was the last point? The physicality compared to Troy Parrott. We had Troy Parrott, huge sort of reputation and stuff like that. But when he was given his chance in a couple of the cup games, I think it was Colchester, and there was another game he was given a chance. Physically, he wasn't ready, and I think that's one thing Mason Melia does have on his side. From being like, let's not forget, League of Ireland isn't like the Premier League. You don't have VAR interrupting every 2 minutes. You are allowed to lay challenges on players and stuff like that. It's a bit more physically demanding. And the fact that he's already got nearly 100 games under his belt at that level, a bit of Champions League experience and stuff like that, he's 6'2". It gives him more of a chance of making it than maybe Troy Parrott.
Okay. Anything else that feel like we're missing on that?
I think Colin, you mentioned about his mentality. Just from any interview clips I've heard with him, he seems to be a guy who has his head screwed on. He doesn't seem like maybe any sort of a messer. I think Parrott maybe laid that at his door, maybe that he wasn't quite there mentally. I think he seemed to mature a bit, but I think for an 18-year-old, geez, I know myself at 18, I was an idiot. So, like, to be that kind of...
What's different now, Jack?
Very little. I'm speaking from a point of expertise here.
Brilliant.
I think on that point, though, it's important to note that, Clive Clark, he did carve out a career for himself in England. He has that guidance that will maybe keep him focused on it, whereas maybe some other players lose their way because maybe they don't have people in and around their camp that have been there and done it and don't know what it takes to succeed.
Yeah, what level did he play at, just out of curiosity?
I think he played with Stoke City. I think he made nearly over 200 appearances for someone like Stoke City or something.
Oh, okay, so a fairly decent level. Like, it wasn't like...
Let me just check.
Level. Yeah.
You could teach him about the long throw-ins. Then that's the case. Yeah.
Could you imagine?
You're right, Dave. He played over 200 league games for Stoke.
Yeah.
Stoke, I think West Ham is there, Sunderland, so
he's Premier League footballer, yeah. Yeah, geez, if he can take the long throw-ins, he'll probably be straight into the team on the 1st of January.
It is interesting, like Dave brought up, though, just maybe lastly, is that there are so many young players that have seemed to have picked Spurs over other clubs, in the last few years. I haven't seen much of a pathway there. For whatever reason, we haven't given these guys a lot of opportunities, but they continue to pick us. So we must be doing something behind the scenes or some sort of types of big promises, I guess.
It's the quality of the sports nutrition and health and fitness team.
I was just going to say, he needs to, avoid that curse, doesn't he?
Yeah. In fairness, I'd say when these guys come and look at the training ground, it's very impressive. This is the sort of place I'd love to come into every day. So I think that's big for them. And I think Ange, as we knew, he could have sold sand to the Arabs the way he talked. I think he just had that ability to get through to people. And I think, like, Bergvall and Vuskovic in particular, like, Bergvall chose us over Barcelona. I've never heard of a player choosing Tottenham over Barcelona.
Dragusin
chose us over Bayern Munich. And
Bayern Munich, yeah.
Vuskovic, I believe Man City wanted him. I don't know if they quite went as far as we did, but geez, when Man City were in from, like, and we managed to get him. So I think there was something there with Ange in terms of convincing players to join. For his shortcomings, I think that convincing players to join was something that he did have really as his trump card. So maybe something on top of the Europa League will come to thank him for all these wonderful young players that he got through the door.
Yeah, damn, that's a lot of phone calls that he was making. If it really was him that was convincing all these players, he probably had to make sure he was talking to the right one. Maybe got their names wrong once or twice. But thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for giving up your evenings and taking time out as well. And thank you, everybody, for watching along. Of course, we'll be back next week with more panel shows and descend into the chaos of the last international break, at least for some time now. So get ready. The December fixture list is ahead, and of course North London derbies as well. Thank you all. Come on, you Spurs. See you on the way out.